Millionaire's twins were born paralyzed until the black maid rubbed their legs and something shocking happened. What's the point of all the money in the world if you can't save the ones you love? That was the question that haunted Richard Hale every single morning he opened his eyes in his enormous, silent mansion. The chandeliers glimmered, the marble floors shone, the scent of fresh roses filled the air, yet everything around him felt hollow, meaningless, empty. He had built his empire with his mind, not his heart. He was the man newspapers called the modern titan. His inventions revolutionized medicine, his companies employed thousands, and his net worth could buy a small country. But in the private corners of his life, in the quiet of his luxurious home, Richard was just a broken father of two sons he could not fix. Daniel and David, his twin boys, were born beautiful with their mother's blue eyes and his strong jawline. But the joy of their birth had quickly turned to heartbreak. The doctor's words still echoed in his memory, sharp and merciless like a blade. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, your sons have a congenital spinal condition. They will never walk." He had stood frozen in that hospital room, the smell of disinfectant burning his nose. His wife, Claire, sobbed quietly beside him, clutching the tiny hands of their newborns. And he, Richard Hale, the man who never bowed to fate, clenched his jaw and swore under his breath, "We'll find a way." 7 years later, that promise had become a curse. The boys were now old enough to ask questions, painful ones. "Daddy, why can't we run like other kids? Daddy, will we ever walk?" And Richard, who faced boardrooms full of investors without fear, could never answer them. He'd taken them to every specialist in the country, the best neurologists, physiotherapists, and surgeons. He had flown them to Switzerland, Germany, Japan, anywhere that whispered a possibility. Millions spent, thousands of tests done, endless hope, endless disappointment. The results were always the same. "There's nothing more we can do." At night, when the world slept, Richard would sit alone in his study, a glass of scotch in one hand, old medical reports in the other. The faint laughter of the twins drifted from upstairs, mixed with the sound of their wheelchairs rolling across the wooden floor. It was a sound that broke him a little more each night. Richard was not a cruel man. He loved his sons deeply, perhaps too deeply, but his love had become obsessive, desperate. He treated their condition like a business problem waiting to be solved. If one treatment failed, he'd fund another. If one research team gave up, he'd hire 2 more. He even built a private medical lab in his estate, a monument to his refusal to surrender. To him, faith was foolish, hope was sentimental, science was the only truth worth believing in. So when his wife once whispered, "Maybe we should pray," he snapped. "Pray to who, Claire? To a God who watched our sons come into this world broken? No, I'll fix them myself." The conversation ended there, but his words cut deeper than he realized. From that night on, Claire stopped suggesting prayer and started spending more time in quiet tears. Despite everything, the Hale mansion was not without joy. The twins, though paralyzed, were full of light. Daniel loved to draw, filling sketchbooks with superheroes who looked just like him, brave and unbroken. David, the more curious one, loved to tinker with gadgets, always asking how things worked. They were inseparable, laughing, playing, dreaming together. But every time Richard looked at them, the joy in their eyes was also a reminder of his failure. Then came the day that changed everything. It started like any other, with the distant hum of machines, the echo of the gardener's shears, and the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the halls. Richard sat at the dining table, scrolling through medical journals on his tablet. His sons in their wheelchairs were giggling as they tried to feed each other pancakes. Claire watched them with a faint smile, weary yet loving. That's when the new maid arrived. She was introduced by the housekeeper, Margaret, a tall, dark-skinned woman in her 40s with calm eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 quiet prayers. "Mr. Hale, this is Grace, the new maid," the housekeeper said. "She comes highly recommended." Richard looked up briefly. "Good, make sure she understands the rules, I don't like noise, and tell her this is a house of order, not superstition." Grace bowed slightly, her hands folded neatly before her. "Yes, sir." She said little else, but something in her gaze lingered, not defiant but steady. Days passed and Grace worked quietly in the background. She was efficient, respectful, and never intrusive. The twins liked her instantly. She had a gentle warmth that filled the room whenever she was near. She'd hum soft hymns while dusting the windows, whisper short prayers under her breath when she thought no one was listening. But Richard noticed. One evening, he caught her murmuring something near the boys' room. His face hardened. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Grace turned slowly, her expression calm. "Just saying a prayer, sir." Richard's voice rose. "Not in my house. I don't want any of that nonsense here. My sons need medicine, not miracles. Do you understand?" She lowered her gaze respectfully. "Yes, sir." But as she walked away, her lips moved again silently. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the scene, her words, her composure, her quiet defiance. Something about her unsettled him. He poured himself another glass of scotch and stared out at the moonlit garden. He remembered his mother, a devout woman who prayed for him every morning before school. "Never mock faith, Richard," she used to say. "There will come a day when your science will fail you and you'll realize God was never the enemy." He had dismissed those words then, but now, with his sons' wheelchairs sitting silently by their beds, he felt the faintest sting of doubt. Could faith really heal what science could not? He shook the thought away angrily. No, that's weakness. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about that maid, about her quiet strength, her steady eyes. The next morning, Richard prepared for a week-long business trip to Boston. As he packed, Claire stood by the door. "Don't you think you're pushing yourself too hard?" she asked softly. "I have to," he said. "Every hour I waste is an hour closer to failure." She hesitated. "Maybe just rest a little, the boys." "I'm doing this for the boys," he interrupted, his tone sharp. She sighed, defeated. "Then promise me you'll at least let someone else take care of you while you're gone." He smiled faintly, kissed her on the forehead, and whispered, "I don't need taking care of, Claire, I just need answers." When he left that morning, Grace stood by the door with the twins, waving goodbye. "Take good care of them," he said curtly. "I will, sir," she replied, her voice steady. He didn't notice the quiet determination in her eyes, the kind that comes not from defiance but from faith. That night, as the mansion settled into silence, Grace knelt beside the twins' beds. The boys were half asleep, their breathing soft and even. She looked at their frail legs, the way they lay motionless beneath the blankets. A tear slipped down her cheek. In a whisper, she said, "Lord, I know I was told not to, but these children don't deserve this. If you can use my hands, then let it be so." She reached for the bowl of warm water she had brought with her, the same water she'd used to clean earlier. She dipped a cloth into it and began to rub gently on Daniel's legs, then David's. Her movements were slow, tender, almost like a prayer in motion. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, something unseen began to stir too. But that moment, that silent act of faith, belonged not to Richard Hale, the man of science, but to the maid who still believed miracles could find their way into even the coldest hearts. And while Richard was miles away, convinced that only logic could save his sons, fate was already preparing to humble him in the most shocking way possible. The sun hung low that afternoon, its golden light spilling gently through the vast windows of the Hale mansion. The air inside was calm, almost too calm, broken only by the quiet tick of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Richard Hale had left for a business meeting in the city, his usual air of command trailing behind him. The sound of his car disappearing down the long driveway left an emptiness behind, a silence that seemed to stretch through the walls. Inside the nursery, Grace was folding laundry. The twins, Daniel and David, were in their room, playing with toy cars on the floor beside their wheelchairs. Their laughter, though faint, carried a sweetness that made her smile. But then the laughter stopped. A sharp cry pierced the quiet afternoon, then another. Grace froze, her hands trembled as she dropped the folded shirt onto the bed and rushed toward the boys' room. When she opened the door, her heart broke. Daniel was holding his legs, his small face twisted in pain. David's eyes were filled with tears. Both boys were crying not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something sharp and unbearable. "My legs," Daniel gasped. "It hurts, it really hurts." "Mine too," David whimpered. "They're burning." Grace knelt between them, her heart pounding. "Oh, my sweet children, what's wrong?" "I don't know," Daniel sobbed. "It just started hurting, it never hurts." That last sentence hit her like a thunderclap. They had never felt anything in their legs before, not warmth, not touch, not pain. For 7 long years, their lower bodies had been silent, empty. And now pain. Grace's eyes widened, trembling between fear and wonder. She didn't know what to do, whether to call the doctor or comfort them. But something deep within her, something stronger than reason, whispered, "Pray." She hesitated for a moment. Richard's warning echoed in her mind. "No prayers in my house. My sons need medicine, not miracles." But could she really stand there and watch them cry, knowing she had faith in her hands and love in her heart, and do nothing? Grace took a deep breath. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Lord, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I can't just stand by." She hurried to the adjoining bathroom, filled a bowl with warm water, and grabbed a clean white rag. As the steam rose from the bowl, she knelt on the floor beside the twins. Her eyes glistened with compassion. "SHH, it's all right," she murmured softly. "Mama Grace is here." She dipped the rag into the warm water, wrung it out, and began to gently rub Daniel's legs. Her hands moved slowly, tenderly, tracing down from his knees to his ankles. As she worked, she began to hum a tune, an old gospel song her grandmother used to sing back home in Georgia. "There is healing in your hands, Lord. Healing in your name." Her voice was low, trembling, but full of faith. The melody filled the room like a whisper of heaven itself. Daniel stopped crying first, his breathing slowed, his wide eyes stared at his legs. "Miss Grace," he whispered, "it's tingling." Grace froze mid-stroke, the rag still pressed against his calf. "What did you say, baby?" "It's tingling, I feel it." David's voice followed, half in tears, half in shock. "Me too, it feels like little ants." Grace's heart raced, tears filled her eyes. She placed a shaking hand on Daniel's shin and felt the faintest twitch beneath her fingers. She gasped aloud, "Oh Lord Jesus." The twins looked at her, confusion and amazement mingled on their faces. "What's happening to us?" David asked. Grace could barely speak. "God is touching you, children, that's what's happening." Her tears fell freely now. She dipped the rag again and continued rubbing, moving to David's legs. The boys winced at first, not from pain but from unfamiliar sensation. They had never known what it felt like to be touched there. Grace kept humming, her voice breaking through her sobs. "You make the blind eyes see. You make the lame walk free." The warmth in the room seemed to grow. A faint breeze, though no window was open, stirred the curtains. The very air felt charged, alive. And as she rubbed, something miraculous began to happen. Daniel's toes twitched again, this time stronger. David gasped and pointed. Look at his foot." Grace's trembling hands covered her mouth as she saw it, the faint, unmistakable movement of Daniel's right foot curling slightly inward. "Jesus," she whispered, "thank you, Jesus." Then David's legs twitched too, once, then twice, small but visible movements beneath the skin. The twins cried again, but this time with laughter and shock. "It's moving, it's really moving." Grace broke down, falling to her knees fully. Her tears dropped into the bowl of water as she whispered over and over, "Thank you, Lord, thank you, Lord." Minutes passed like hours. Grace didn't know how long she had been there, her knees aching on the cold floor, her hands trembling as she continued the gentle rubbing motion. The boys' faces glowed with wonder. They could feel warmth spreading through their legs, something they had only dreamed of. And then the most astonishing thing happened. Daniel's right foot jerked, not from reflex but from will. He looked down at it, eyes wide as the stars. "I did that," he whispered. "I moved it." Grace froze, her hands hovering above his legs. "You what?" "I did it," Daniel repeated, louder this time, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I tried and it moved." David tried too. He stared at his own foot, his small face twisted in fierce concentration. For a moment, nothing happened, then a tiny tremor. Barely noticeable, but there. "I felt that," he shouted, laughing and crying at once. "Miss Grace, I felt it." Grace threw her head back, sobbing uncontrollably. Hallelujah, glory be to God. She didn't care who heard, the moment was too holy, too pure. The twins clung to her, their little arms wrapping around her neck. Their laughter filled the air, bright and musical, washing away years of silence and sorrow. But the miracle's beauty was fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. Because in that very moment, the sound of a car engine rumbled up the driveway. Grace froze, the twins stopped laughing. The front door opened, footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy, determined. Richard Hale was home. He wasn't supposed to be, the meeting had ended early. Grace's heart pounded in her chest. She quickly wiped her tears, setting the bowl aside. The rag slipped from her trembling fingers, damp with water and faith. "Miss Grace," Daniel whispered, "what's wrong?" "Nothing, baby," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Everything's all right." But she knew it was. Richard's voice carried through the house. "Claire, boys, where is everyone?" Grace stood up, her knees weak. She wanted to hide, to explain, to do something, but her body refused to move. Then the door swung open. Richard froze at the threshold. His sharp blue eyes swept across the scene, the bowl of water, the wet rag, Grace standing guiltily beside his sons, tears on her cheeks. His gaze darkened. "What is this?" "Sir," Grace began, her voice trembling, "please, What are you doing to my boys?" His voice rose, anger flaring like a storm. "Daddy, wait," Daniel cried. "She wasn't." "Quiet," he barked, his tone cutting through the room like a blade. "You," he pointed at Grace. "I told you never to touch them, never to bring your superstitious nonsense into my house." Grace's lips quivered. "Mr. Hale, please, they were in pain, I couldn't just." "In pain," he snapped, "and your solution was water and a song," he laughed bitterly. "Unbelievable." But before he could say another word, a small voice broke through the tension. "Daddy," David said softly. Richard turned. "Daddy," the boy said again, his voice trembling but full of awe. "I felt my leg." Richard blinked. "What?" Daniel chimed in, his face shining with tears. "It's true, Daddy, we both did, look." And before Richard could react, Daniel's foot twitched again, small but undeniable. For the first time in 7 years, Richard saw it with his own eyes. The color drained from his face, the anger in his voice died mid-breath. He took a step forward, disbelief etched across his face. What did you just do?" he whispered. Daniel smiled through his tears. "I moved it, Daddy, Miss Grace helped me." Richard's throat tightened. He looked from his sons to Grace, the woman he had dismissed, forbidden, silenced. She stood there quietly, hands clasped, tears rolling down her dark cheeks, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock and the sound of 3 hearts beating too fast. Richard didn't speak, he couldn't. His mind, built on reason, logic, science, could not explain what his eyes had just seen. Something impossible had happened. Something divine. And though he wouldn't admit it, not yet, a small crack had formed in the walls around his heart. A crack where light had just begun to seep through. For the first time in 7 years, Richard Hale was silent. No word, no theory, no command left his lips. He stood frozen in the doorway of the twins' room, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. The mighty man of science, the architect of empires, was staring at the one thing he could not quantify: hope. Daniel's small foot had moved again, just slightly, but enough to make Richard's world tilt on its axis. "Daddy," Daniel's voice was soft, uncertain. "Did you see it?" Richard swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Do it again," he whispered. Daniel focused, his brows furrowed in concentration. A few seconds passed, and then there it was, a tiny flicker, the faintest movement of toes. Richard gasped, stumbling forward as if drawn by something unseen. "No," he muttered under his breath, that's impossible." "It's not impossible," Grace said quietly. Her voice, though soft, filled the room. She stood near the window, her hands still damp from the bowl of water. Her posture was calm, but her eyes glistened with tears. Richard turned on her sharply. What did you do to them?" Grace didn't flinch. "I prayed." "You what?" "I prayed, sir," she said again, her tone steady but reverent. "And I rubbed their legs with warm water, that's all." Richard laughed, a short, strangled sound. "Prayer? You think prayer did this? That's absurd. There must be an explanation, some neurological trigger, maybe a spontaneous muscle reaction." He crouched beside Daniel and touched his son's leg, his fingers trembling. The muscle beneath the skin felt warmer, alive in a way he had never felt before. "David," he said hoarsely, "you too try to move." David nodded. He concentrated, biting his lip, his small hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. Then, a twitch, a flutter, his ankle shifted almost imperceptibly but real. Richard's hand flew to his mouth, his eyes darted from one boy to the other. This isn't possible, he murmured. Grace's voice came quietly behind him. With men it is impossible, but with God. Enough, Richard's shout echoed through the room, sharp as a blade. He stood abruptly, towering over her. Don't you dare bring religion into this. I don't want your superstitions poisoning my sons' minds. Grace met his gaze unshaken. I didn't poison them, sir. I only did what a mother would do if her children were in pain. You are not their mother, he snapped. For a heartbeat silence. Then Daniel whispered, she helped us, Daddy. Please don't be mad at her. Richard turned to his sons, and the sight of their pleading faces softened something in him. He ran a hand through his hair, packing the room like a man trapped between two worlds. Fine, he said finally. Fine, I'll call Dr. Patel. He'll run tests, figure out what happened. Grace bowed her head. As you wish, sir. But as she left the room, she whispered under her breath, Lord, open his eyes, even if it takes breaking his heart to do it. By evening, the mansion was alive with commotion. Dr. Patel, a distinguished neurologist from Richard's private team, arrived in record time, briefcase in hand. His assistant followed, setting up portable monitors and examination equipment in the twins' room. Mr. Hale, Patel said as he adjusted his glasses, you said there were signs of movement. Yes, Richard replied curtly, observe for yourself. The doctor knelt before Daniel, performing a series of reflex tests, light touches, pressure points, nerve stimulation. The twins giggled at the odd sensations. I can feel that, David said. His eyes wide, it tickles. Dr. Patel froze, exchanging a startled look with Richard. You felt that? David nodded vigorously. Patel ran another test, and this. Daniel laughed, yes, stop, that's weird. The doctor sat back slowly, his face pale. Mr. Hale, they shouldn't be able to feel that. Their spinal scans showed complete paralysis of the lower limbs. I know, Richard said, run the tests again. They did, over and over. Each time the results were the same, reflexes present, sensation returning, muscular response improving. Dr. Patel finally stood, adjusting his stethoscope with shaking hands. This is extraordinary, I can't explain it medically. Richard frowned, then find someone who can. Mr. Hale, Patel said softly, what happened here today, it defies everything we know about their condition. Richard didn't answer. He was staring at the twins, his sons, laughing as they poked each other's legs, marveling at every new twitch and sensation. He should have felt triumph, relief, joy. But instead, all he felt was fear. If this was real, it meant there were forces he couldn't control, couldn't explain. And for a man who built his empire on certainty, that was unbearable. Later that night, long after Dr. Patel had left, Richard sat alone in his study. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the antique clock. His glass of scotch sat untouched beside him. He replayed the events of the day over and over, each moment burning in his mind, the twitch, the laughter, Grace's words. I prayed. He clenched his fists. No, he whispered, it wasn't prayer, it couldn't be. He opened his laptop, pulling up medical journals, research on spontaneous recovery in spinal patients, case studies of misdiagnosis. Hours passed, nothing made sense. At some point, he rubbed his temples and leaned back, exhaustion overtaking him. That's when he noticed something, movement by the door. Grace. She stood there silently, a tray of tea in her hands. Her posture was humble, but her presence filled the room like quiet strength. I brought you some tea, sir, she said softly. He glanced up at her, his voice cold. You shouldn't be here. I know, she replied, but you haven't eaten. Mrs. Hale said you hadn't left this room since the doctor left. He stared at her for a moment, then sighed. Fine, leave it. Grace set the tray down, then hesitated. Sir, may I say something? Richard didn't answer, but she continued anyway. I know you don't believe in miracles, but I've seen too much in my life not to. He gave a bitter laugh. You think God healed them just like that? I don't think, sir, she said softly. I know, because I felt him here in this house, in that room. He turned toward her, his eyes sharp. "You don't understand. My entire life has been about facts, proof, evidence. My son's condition was irreversible. Science said so." Grace nodded, and yet here we are. Her calmness unnerved him more than her faith. He looked away, his voice tight. "If you're trying to convert me, save your breath." "I'm not," she said. "I'm only trying to remind you that maybe, just maybe, the answers you're looking for don't come from your lab." He scoffed, "So I should just pray and wait for magic?" Grace's eyes softened. "No, sir, you should open your heart, because sometimes God doesn't show his power to prove himself right, he shows it to remind us we're not." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. At dawn, Richard found himself standing in the twins' doorway again. The boys were still asleep, their faces peaceful, their small legs half exposed under the blankets. He approached quietly, staring at them the way a starving man looks at bread. Tentatively, he reached down and placed a hand on Daniel's foot, warm, responsive. A shudder ran through him. He closed his eyes, whispering to no one, "If there's someone behind this, I don't know what you want from me." His voice cracked, "Just don't take it away." The room was silent, but inside Richard something shifted. The walls he had built of intellect, pride, defiance were cracking, and through the cracks a faint light seeped in. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the air was different. Claire was radiant, tears in her eyes as she watched the twins chatter excitedly about their tingling legs. Even the servants smiled from the kitchen doorway. Richard said little. He ate slowly, distracted. Grace, standing quietly by the wall, met his eyes once, and in that moment he didn't see a maid. He saw something else. A vessel of faith. After dinner, as the twins were wheeled away to bed, Claire touched Richard's arm. "You saw it, didn't you? You can't deny it anymore." He hesitated. "I saw something." Claire smiled sadly. "You've spent your life trying to be God, Richard. Maybe now it's time to let him be." He looked at her, speechless. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He wandered into the nursery once more. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing everything in silver. The twins were asleep, holding hands. Between them, the rag Grace had used still rested on the nightstand, dry and ordinary, yet sacred somehow. Richard picked it up, running his fingers over the fabric. For the first time, he didn't see superstition. He saw faith, simple, unscientific, and undeniably powerful. He sank into the armchair beside their beds, his eyes wet. "Maybe," he whispered, "my mother was right." Outside, the first light of morning began to touch the sky. And inside the heart of Richard Hale, the man who had worshipped reason, who thought miracles were fairy tales, something began to change. A small, fragile seed of belief had been planted. A crack had formed, and through it, light was finally seeping in. 2 weeks had passed since the day the impossible became real. The Hale mansion, once heavy with silence and sorrow, now thrummed with life. The twins' laughter carried through the halls like music, a sound that still startled Richard sometimes because it was mixed with the faint thud of small, unsteady footsteps. Daniel and David could now stand with support. Every morning, Grace helped them practice taking a few steps, her hands gentle on their backs, her voice full of encouragement and prayer. The boys would wobble, fall, laugh, and try again. And every time they did, Richard watched from the doorway, quiet, awed, afraid to even breathe too loudly, as if the miracle might disappear if he did. He had not yet spoken the word miracle, but he no longer mocked it. Something had shifted inside him. His study, once filled with medical books and research papers, now also held a small Bible resting quietly on his desk beside a framed photo of his sons. Sometimes in the deep of night, he'd open it, not to read but to hold, to feel. The man who once believed in nothing but logic was now learning to sit in the mystery of faith. But peace, like all fragile things, never lasts long. It was a windy afternoon when the storm returned, not from the sky but from the past. Grace was in the garden with the twins, helping them walk between rows of roses. The boys' laughter floated through the air, mingling with the scent of blossoms. Then a sleek black car rolled up the long driveway. Grace turned, her brow furrowing as the vehicle came to a stop. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, elegant, poised, and familiar. Claire Hale. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly, her pale blue dress crisp, But her eyes, those soft, tired eyes, carried the weight of someone who'd wandered too far for too long. Grace's hands tightened around the twins' shoulders. Daniel blinked. "Mommy." The word slipped out like a prayer. Claire froze, her lips trembling. "Oh, my bobbies." She ran forward, dropping to her knees before them. The boys, stunned for a moment, then threw their arms around her. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she clutched them to her heart. "My darlings," she sobbed, "I missed you so much." "Mommy, look," David said excitedly, stepping away from her. "Watch this." And then, before her astonished eyes, he took 3 wobbly steps into her arms. Claire gasped, You can walk." Daniel beamed proudly. "Miss Grace helped us, and Daddy said we're getting stronger every day." Claire's tears froze. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward Grace. "You," she said softly, disbelief in her voice. "You did this." Grace hesitated. "The Lord did, ma'am, I just..." But before she could finish, another voice thundered from behind them. "Claire!" Richard stood at the mansion's entrance, his expression unreadable. He hadn't expected this moment so soon. Maybe he'd hoped it would never come. The wind caught his coat, whipping it around him as he descended the steps slowly. "Richard," she breathed, standing, "you look different." He didn't smile. "You shouldn't have come." She raised her chin slightly. "They're my sons too." Grace, sensing the storm brewing, gently ushered the boys back toward the house. "Come on, sweethearts, let's give Mommy and Daddy some time." As the twins disappeared inside, the air between Richard and Claire tightened like a drawn bow. They met later in the sitting room. The air crackled with the tension of years unsaid. Claire stood by the fireplace, her fingers tracing the edge of the mantel. "They told me you built this house bigger after I left," she said softly, "but it still feels empty." Richard crossed his arms. "You left, Claire, you walked away." "I had to," she whispered. "You were turning into someone I didn't recognize. Everything was science, logic, control. There was no space left for faith or love." He looked away. "I was trying to save them." "I know," she said, her voice breaking, "but in saving them, you lost yourself and you lost me." Silence, the crackle of the fire filled the room. Finally, Richard said, "Why are you here now?" Claire's eyes softened. "Because I heard what happened, the boys walking, the story spreading. I had to see it for myself, and when I did, I knew I couldn't stay away." He frowned. "So you came back to what exactly? A miracle you didn't believe could happen." Her gaze flickered. "I always believed in miracles, Richard. You're the one who didn't." The words hit harder than she intended. She stepped closer. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to take my boys somewhere safe away from all of this. The attention, the press, the madness." Richard's eyes snapped up. "Take them? You think I'd let you walk in after 2 years and just..." "They're my sons too," she shouted. "And I won't have them growing up in a house full of confusion, half science, half superstition." He flinched. "Superstition." She sighed, pressing her hands to her face. "Richard, don't you see? You're swinging from one extreme to another. First, you rejected faith. Now you're clinging to it like a drowning man. What happens when it doesn't give you what you want next time?" He stepped closer, voice low but firm. "Faith isn't a formula, Claire, it's surrender, and I think that's what scares you." Her lip trembled. "You don't understand." "No," he said softly, "for the first time I do." She stared at him for a long moment, at the man who once mocked her prayers, now standing before her humbled, changed. "I saw their legs move," she whispered. "I saw the joy in their faces, and part of me wants to believe it's a miracle, but another part, the part that's still bleeding from what we've lost." Her voice broke. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Richard's tone gentled. "Then don't believe me, believe what you saw. The truth doesn't need your permission." Later that night, Claire wandered into the twins' room. They were asleep, curled together under the same blanket. Grace sat nearby in a chair, reading softly from her worn Bible. Claire watched her for a long time before speaking. "You really love them, don't you?" Grace looked up, smiling faintly. "With all my heart, ma'am, but not more than their parents do." Claire hesitated. "When you prayed for them, what did you ask for?" Grace's eyes softened. "I didn't ask for them to walk. I asked for God to touch them in a way no man could explain, and he did." Claire blinked back tears. "I thought faith was just hopping against logic." Grace shook her head. Faith isn't about ignoring reason, it's about trusting what's greater than it. You and Mr. Hale have both been fighting the same battle, just from different sides. She closed her Bible and stood, and maybe now God's asking you to meet in the middle. Claire's gaze drifted to her sleeping sons. She knelt beside them, brushing their hair gently. "They're so beautiful," she whispered. "They're miracles," Grace said. "Every breath they take is proof of it." The next morning, Richard found Claire sitting by the window, watching the sunrise. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "I kept hearing their laughter." He joined her, hands in his pockets. "It's the best sound in the world." She nodded. "They're happy here." He studied her carefully. "Are you?" A long silence, then almost a whisper. "I could be." Richard looked out at the garden where Grace was hanging laundry, humming one of her hymns. "You don't have to run this time." Claire turned to him. "And you don't have to control everything." For the first time in years, they smiled at the same moment. That evening, as the twins played in the garden, Richard and Claire stood side by side watching them. Daniel took 3 shaky steps without help, his arms outstretched. David followed, both of them laughing as they tumbled into the grass. Grace clapped her hands from the porch. "Look at you two, walking all by yourselves." Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "They're really doing it." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "They are, and they're doing it together." She leaned into him slightly. "Maybe we can too." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the real miracle." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky gold and crimson, Grace whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Because sometimes miracles don't just heal legs. They heal hearts. And in that moment, in the garden of the Hale mansion, the sound of laughter rose again, pure, unbroken, and whole. For a week, the Hale mansion felt almost whole again. The boys walked more each day, Richard and Claire talked more each night, and Grace hummed soft gospel tunes that drifted through every corner of the home. But peace has a fragile heart, and sometimes all it takes is a single knock on the door to break it. It came one Thursday morning. Grace was in the kitchen helping the twins with breakfast when she heard raised voices in the hall. She stepped out quietly and froze. A tall man in a gray suit stood at the door holding a leather briefcase. His sharp tones sliced through the air. "Mrs. Hale, I'm here on behalf of your mother and father. They're very concerned about the well-being of their grandsons." Claire looked tense, her arms crossed. "Mr. Gordon, please, I told them I can handle this." The lawyer's voice softened, but only slightly. "Claire, you've been gone for 2 years. You come back to find your children suddenly healed under the care of a domestic worker with no medical background. Do you not see how that looks?" Richard stepped into view. "Excuse me." Mr. Gordon turned, his eyes cold. "You must be Dr. Hale. I've read your work on neurodevelopmental paralysis. Impressive credentials. Pity they couldn't save your own children." Richard's jaw tightened. "Watch your words." The lawyer smiled faintly. "Don't worry, doctor, we're not here to attack you. We're simply ensuring the boys' safety. Mrs. Hale has agreed to file for temporary custody until the situation can be properly evaluated." Grace's heart skipped. "Custody," she whispered. Richard blinked, stunned. "Claire." She avoided his eyes. "It's just temporary. They said it's for the boys' protection until we know what really happened." Richard's voice dropped. "You mean until you can explain the miracle in a way that fits your parents' logic?" Claire flinched. Mr. Gordon interjected smoothly. "If we can arrange visitation peacefully, there's no need to involve the courts immediately." Richard took a step closer, his voice calm but steely. "You will not take my sons from this house." The lawyer glanced down at his papers. "That's not for you to decide, doctor. We'll be in touch." He turned and walked out, leaving silence and heartbreak in his wake. That night the house felt different. The twins sensed it, the tension, the fear. Daniel clung to Grace during bedtime, whispering, "Is mommy gonna take us away?" Grace brushed his hair gently. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, baby. God brought your family together for a reason." Downstairs, Richard stood by the window, staring into the night. Claire sat across from him, her hands trembling. "Richard," she said softly, "I didn't mean for it to get this far. My parents think you're unstable, that you're letting some uneducated maid experiment on the twins." He turned, eyes burning. Experiment. Grace is the reason they can walk, Claire. The doctors did nothing for years. She prayed and something happened, something no science can explain. Claire's voice cracked, and that terrifies them. They think it's dangerous, that maybe the boys are only temporarily better or worse, being used for some kind of miracle story. Richard clenched his fists. And you believe them? Her silence was answer enough. He exhaled slowly. You came back into our lives because of faith. Don't let fear take you out again. She wiped her eyes, whispering, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. 3 days later, the papers arrived. Notice of custody hearing, Hale versus Hale. Grace found Richard staring at the document, his face pale. Sir, she asked softly. He didn't answer. She walked closer. What will you do? Richard looked up, eyes dark with pain. Fight, but not the way I used to. Grace tilted her head. How do you mean? I used to think battles were won by proof, facts, data, but this time I'll let the truth speak for itself. He set the papers down, his voice steady. If God healed my boys, he'll defend them too. Grace smiled faintly. Now you sound like me. The day of the hearing arrived with gray skies. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, cameras flashing. The Miracle Twins, one headline read. Science or superstition, another blared. Inside, the courtroom was filled with murmurs and stares. Claire sat with her parents, elegant, stern people who looked like they hadn't smiled in years. Her mother leaned over and whispered, We'll bring them home, darling, you did the right thing. On the other side, Richard sat alone, except for Grace, who quietly prayed under her breath, clutching a small Bible in her lap. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Dr. Hale, the judge began, you claim your children's paralysis was miraculously healed by prayer conducted by your housemaid. Is that correct? Richard rose. I claim that something beyond medical science occurred, Your Honor. I witnessed it with my own eyes. The opposing lawyer smirked. And you expect this court to accept divine intervention as evidence? Richard met his gaze calmly. I expect the court to accept that 2 children who were medically diagnosed as permanently paralyzed are now walking. The lawyer turned to the judge. With respect, Your Honor, children can show temporary motor improvement under extreme emotional stimuli. Furthermore, there's no record of any legitimate medical reevaluation confirming sustained recovery. Grace clenched her Bible tighter. Then the lawyer turned, smiling coldly. Perhaps we should hear from the maid herself. The judge nodded. Miss Grace, please step forward. Grace rose slowly, heart pounding, and stood before the court. State your name. Grace Thompson. And your occupation. Housemaid to the Hale family, sir. The lawyer circled her. And did you, Miss Thompson, claim responsibility for healing these children? She lifted her chin slightly. No, sir, I prayed for them. He smirked. Prayed, and what exactly happened? Grace's eyes softened. They cried in pain, so I bathed their legs and asked God to touch them. He did, that's all I know. Laughter rippled through the room. The lawyer pounced. So no medical treatment, no licensed therapy, just your prayers and warm water. Grace met his gaze without fear. Yes, sir, because sometimes what medicine can't reach, mercy can. The courtroom went silent. Even the judge hesitated. The lawyer frowned, regrouping. And do you expect us to believe that the Almighty personally visited the Hale residence because you asked him to? Grace smiled gently. I don't expect you to believe anything, sir. I just know what I saw, and so do those boys. The lawyer sighed. No further questions. When it was over, the judge called for a short recess. Richard and Grace stepped outside the courtroom. She spoke with power, he said quietly, like she wasn't afraid. Grace smiled. Fear leaves when you know who stands beside you. He nodded slowly. Then I hope he stands beside me now. Back inside, the judge leaned forward. This case presents unusual circumstances, but the children's welfare is our primary concern. Claire's lawyer rose. We propose temporary custody to Mrs. Hale until further medical examination is complete. The judge turned to Richard. Dr. Hale, any objection? Richard stood. Yes, Your Honor. He paused, glancing toward his sons sitting in the gallery beside Grace. I object to treating my children like case studies. They're not experiments, they're evidence that life isn't limited to what we can explain. The judge studied him carefully. "And what would you have me do?" Richard took a breath. "Come see for yourself." Murmurs rippled through the court. "Excuse me," the judge said. "Your Honor," Richard continued, "I invite this court to witness what's being debated. Let the boys walk before you." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Very well." Grace gently helped Daniel and David forward. The courtroom held its breath. The twins stepped onto the marble floor, tiny feet trembling but steady. One step. 2. 3. Then Daniel looked up at the judge and said, "See, Jesus helped us walk." Gasps filled the room. Even Claire covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The judge slowly stood. "Case adjourned for further review," his voice softened. "But Dr. Hale, I've seen many things in this court, none like that." Outside, the reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions, but Richard didn't stop. He held his son's hands and kept walking, Grace just behind him, whispering a prayer of thanks. Claire stood apart, watching them go, torn between love, pride, and confusion. Her mother touched her arm. "It's not over, Claire, we can still win." But Claire's gaze was distant. "I don't know if I want to." That night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Grace found Richard sitting alone again, the custody papers still on the table. He looked up at her. "They might still take them." She nodded softly. "They might, but no one can take the truth." He stared at the flickering candle beside them. "You really believe that?" She smiled. "I've seen it walk, sir." Outside, the rain began to fall, steady, cleansing, alive. And inside, a father bowed his head and prayed for the first time, not for victory, but for peace. The mansion felt different now. Where once there had been silence and sorrow, laughter now echoed through its halls. The twins, Daniel and David, no longer spent their days confined to their wheelchairs. With each passing sunrise, they grew stronger, first standing with trembling legs, then taking hesitant, wobbly steps. Their small victories filled the house with joy. Every stumble was celebrated, every step a miracle. But not everyone saw it that way. Claire Hale stood by the staircase, watching Grace guide the twins through their morning therapy. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast a warm glow around them, and for a fleeting moment, Claire almost smiled. Then she noticed how the boys looked at Grace, with admiration, affection, trust. A faint pang of something dark twisted inside her chest. It wasn't hatred, not exactly. It was the ache of being replaced. For 7 years, Claire had been the mother who couldn't fix them, the woman who had prayed and wept and begged, only to watch her children remain trapped in their wheelchairs. But this maid, this stranger, had done in one afternoon what no doctor or prayer ever could. And deep down, Claire couldn't decide whether to be grateful or furious. When she first returned to the mansion, her parents had welcomed her with sympathy and poison. "She's not just a maid," her mother had said in a hushed tone. "Think, Claire, how could something like that happen? The twins walking after years, there's no logic to it." Her father had nodded, his expression grim. "That woman might have brought some strange power into your home. You've always known these religious types, they dabble in things they don't understand." At first, Claire had dismissed it as nonsense, but each day since her return, she noticed things that unsettled her. The way Grace's prayers seemed to fill the air with warmth, the way Richard sometimes looked at her not with desire but with something softer, respect. And the way the twins talked about her endlessly. "Miss Grace says I should never stop believing. Miss Grace told us God listens, even when people don't." Every word, every smile, every moment they shared pulled them further from Claire. By the end of the week, that poisonous whisper her parents had planted began to grow roots. One evening, Claire stood by the window of Richard's study, her reflection pale against the glass. Behind her, Richard sat at his desk, reading through a stack of medical journals. He had changed too, quieter, humbler somehow. The sharp edge in his voice was gone, replaced by a calm that came from something deeper than science. When Claire spoke, her tone was soft, careful. "Richard, can we talk?" He looked up, setting his papers aside. "Of course, what's on your mind?" She turned from the window, her hands clasped nervously. "It's about Grace." A faint flicker of concern crossed his face. "Grace, what about her?" Claire hesitated, lowering her voice. "I've noticed some things, strange things." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. go on. She's always praying over the boys, always humming those songs. And the twins, they talk about her as if she's their mother. Don't you think that's odd? Richard frowned slightly. She's kind to them, she believes in what she does, and after what happened, Claire, I can't exactly tell her to stop praying. I'm not saying she's unkind, Claire replied quickly. I wonder if you've thought about how she did it, the healing. It's not normal, Richard, you of all people should know that. He exhaled slowly. I've thought about it every day, and I've come to believe not everything can be explained by logic. Or maybe, she pressed, there's another explanation. His eyes narrowed. What are you implying? Claire hesitated, then spoke the words she had been holding back for days. My parents think she might be using something unnatural. Richard stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. You mean witchcraft? She flinched at the word but nodded slightly. You saw it yourself, they couldn't walk and now they can. What if what she did wasn't from God? Silence filled the study like a heavy fog. Finally, Richard rose from his chair. Claire, he said quietly, I've heard a lot of foolish things in my life, but this is beneath you. Her voice trembled. I'm just trying to protect our children. No, he said, his tone sharper now. You're trying to make sense of something you don't understand. You want to believe there's a reason to hate her, but there is. Grace is the reason our sons are walking. Claire's eyes filled with tears. And what about you, Richard? Why do you defend her so fiercely? You've barely looked at me since I came back. He paused, not out of guilt but out of shock. What are you saying? She stepped closer, her voice rising. Maybe it's not just about gratitude. Maybe you've grown attached to her, to the woman who saved your sons. Maybe she's replaced me too. Claire, he said firmly, stop. But she didn't. The dam had broken. You think I don't see it? The way you look at her, the way she looks at you. She's not just a maid anymore, Richard. She's become something else in this house, and it's dangerous. Richard's jaw tightened. You're letting jealousy blind you. Her voice cracked. Jealousy, my husband, my children, everything that used to be mine now revolves around her. The air between them grew tense, thick with words neither could take back. Finally, Richard turned away, his voice quiet but cold. Grace has done nothing but bring light into this house. You, on the other hand, seem intent on bringing back the darkness. Claire's lips parted in shock. You're defending her against me. I'm defending the truth, he said simply. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two broken souls standing on opposite sides of a miracle. Then Claire stormed out, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Later that night, Grace sat alone in her small quarters, folding the twins' laundry. She had overheard enough of the argument to know what had been said. Tears welled in her eyes, but she whispered softly, Lord, don't let me be the reason this house falls apart. I only wanted to help. A gentle knock came at the door. It was Richard. He looked weary, eyes shadowed, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. Miss Grace, he said quietly, can we talk? She stood nervous but composed. Yes, sir. He stepped inside, hesitating before speaking. Claire, she's been saying things about you. Grace nodded slowly. I know, sir. You do. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. I heard enough. She's hurting, Mr. Hale. I don't blame her. Sometimes when people don't understand God's ways, they get afraid. Richard studied her face for a long moment, the calm in her voice, the humility in her eyes. She said you might have used witchcraft, he said finally. Grace smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with tears. If faith is witchcraft, then I'm guilty, sir. Richard's throat tightened. I don't believe her, Grace, not a word of it, but I needed to tell you. Thank you, she said softly. You've come a long way, Mr. Hale. A few months ago, you would have called me a fool for even mentioning God. He chuckled weakly. Maybe I still am one. Grace shook her head. No, sir, you've seen what faith can do. That's more than most men ever will. They stood in silence for a moment, two people bound by something that had no name, no science, no logic. Then Grace said gently, Go to her, sir. She needs her husband, not her fears. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Good night, Grace. Good night, sir. As he walked away, Grace sank to her knees beside the bed, whispering a quiet prayer. Lord, I don't know why you chose me to touch those boys, but if this miracle is to test this house, then give them strength to endure it. The next morning, the storm truly began. Claire's parents arrived unannounced, their expressions grim and cold. They didn't come to talk, they came with accusations. "Mr. Hale," her father said sternly, "we've heard enough about this woman. You've let a witch live under your roof. For the sake of your sons, we're taking Claire and the boys back home." Richard's face hardened. "You'll do no such thing." "Then we'll go to court," her mother snapped. "We'll show them what kind of house you're running here." And just like that, the miracle that had once united the Hale family became the spark that threatened to tear it apart. But Richard wasn't the same man he once was. The man who trusted only science now trusted something greater. He looked the older couple straight in the eyes and said, "Then God help whoever tries to take them from me." And upstairs, Grace stood by the window, praying quietly, knowing that the real battle had only just begun. The evening air was still. The mansion that once rang with tension now sat in a strange calm. The twins, now able to move more freely, laughed faintly in their room as Grace finished reading them a bedtime psalm. Their laughter, light, pure, and innocent, echoed softly through the hallway. Richard stood by the doorway, his eyes moist. It had been weeks since the confrontation. Claire's accusations had torn through the house like a storm, leaving shards of guilt, confusion, and shame in everyone's hearts. But the storm had passed, and in its wake, silence. Grace folded the little Bible she'd been reading and kissed each boy on the forehead. "Sleep well, my darlings," she whispered. "God's angels will keep watch over you." She rose slowly, her back straight but her spirit heavy. As she turned, she found Richard waiting. "Grace," he said quietly, "we need to talk." She nodded, following him into the study, the same room where months ago he'd first told her never to bring her religion into his house. Now that same room felt like a chapel. Richard sat on the edge of his desk, rubbing his hands together. His voice trembled when he spoke. "I don't know how to begin," he said. "Everything has changed since you came. My sons, I've seen what I didn't believe possible, but I also failed to protect you from my wife's words, from her lies." Grace lowered her eyes. "You don't have to apologize, sir. I know what fear does to people. Mrs. Claire was afraid of losing her family. Sometimes fear makes us see evil where there's none." He looked up sharply. "She called you a witch, Grace. She tried to turn me against you." "Yes," Grace said softly, "but you didn't let her." He exhaled deeply. "Only because I saw God in you." That line silenced the air between them. Richard's voice cracked when he added, "For years, I believed in nothing but facts. I dismissed prayer, faith, love, all of it. But now I see my arrogance. You didn't just heal my sons, you healed something inside me too." Grace smiled faintly, tears gathering. "It wasn't me, sir, it was the one who sent me." A long silence followed, then Richard said something she didn't expect. "I want you to stay, Grace, permanently, your family now." Her heart clenched. For a moment, she almost said yes. But then she saw, in her mind's eye, the vision she had weeks ago, the Lord calling her to move on, to bring light where there was darkness. "Sir," she said gently, "my time here is done." Richard blinked. "What do you mean, you can't just?" "I must," she interrupted softly. "You and your sons no longer need me. You have faith now, you have each other. That's what God wanted." He stood abruptly. "Grace, you've changed our lives. You can't walk away like this." Grace smiled sadly. "I'm not walking away, I'm stepping into obedience." Her eyes glistened as she looked around the study, the walls that once held pride, now humbled by love. Richard's voice broke. "Claire has gone to her parents' house. I don't know if she'll ever come back, but I know now I was the one who drove her away, not faith, not you, me." Grace nodded. Maybe this is her time to find healing too. He swallowed hard, then whispered, "Will I ever see you again?" Grace reached out, taking his trembling hand in hers. "If God wills it." A tear escaped his eye. He bowed his head, a man once proud now weeping like a child. Grace gently placed her hand on his shoulder and prayed. "Lord, thank you for the miracle you've done in this home. Bless this father and his sons. Heal what is broken, restore what is lost, and let peace remain even when I am gone." When she finished, Richard couldn't speak. He just nodded, eyes closed, lips trembling. That night, Grace packed her small bag, just the same worn Bible, a change of clothes, and her rosary. Before leaving, she walked into the twins' room one last time. They were asleep, their small legs, once lifeless, now curled and strong beneath their blankets. She brushed their hair gently and whispered, "Keep walking, my loves, keep walking in faith." Then she stepped out into the cool dawn. The gate creaked as she passed through. She turned once to look at the house, its tall white pillars now bathed in soft golden light. A home once filled with doubt now glowed with hope. She smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Lord," she murmured, "for letting me see your glory." And with that, Grace walked down the quiet road, her silhouette fading into the morning mist, a humble servant carrying peace wherever she went. Back inside, Richard woke to find a note on his desk. Her handwriting was neat and steady. "Sir, thank you for trusting me when it mattered most. Remember, miracles don't happen in water or in touch, but in the heart that believes. Grace." Richard pressed the note to his chest. The twins would wake soon, calling her name, asking where she'd gone. He would tell them the truth that their angel had finished her work. Outside, the sun rose higher, and somewhere in the distance, Grace began humming the same soft gospel tune she'd sung that miraculous day. The same song that once brought life back into motion. The same song that left a millionaire on his knees, whispering words he never thought he'd say. "Thank you, God, for grace.